Everyone says you teach people how to treat you, but some people really are just jerks. I once heard a woman complaining that her husband showed his employees more respect than he gave to her. And then in the next breath, she said, well, he knows he has to treat them with respect because they wouldn't stand to be disrespected. And while this might be true, I would also argue that the employee-employer relationship, the 9 to 5 relationship, is just more of a superficial relationship. They didn't have to go home to that man. They didn't have to spend their weekends or holidays with him, and they certainly weren't having kids with him. You see, people can show up temporarily as anybody. It's when you start to spend more time with that person, that their face, that mask that they show to the world, it finally begins to slip. Now, it's because none of us are perfect. We all have bad hair days, days where we are extremely tired, weak moments, and yeah, we can get a little hangry. But that is totally different than treating close friends, family members, or romantic partners with complete disregard. Hello friends, my name is Maria, and I know how hard it is to try to get respect back from a jerk who I've unfortunately already allowed to treat me with disrespect for far too long. And just like me, I'm sure you've heard that old saying, we teach people how to treat us. But I once heard a spin on that theory that has saved me so much time and energy trying to run around being everyone's teacher. And I'd like to share it with you today. So if you're ready, grab that bottle of nail polish and let's talk. I've said several times in my videos that if you show up in the world with self-respect, people will recognize you as someone who has respect for yourself, and in turn, they will naturally treat you with more respect. And while I do believe this goes along the lines of teaching people how to treat you, I have also found it extremely effective to lean back and allow other people who I'm meeting to show me how they intend to treat me right off the bat. And then I decide whether I would like to continue a relationship with this person or pivot and go in a different direction. And I know that in life and love, there are no guarantees, but if you've been around the dating block and you've learned several red flags, you'd be surprised how fast you can get at spotting jerks right off the bat. But if we don't lean back and make a commitment to ourselves that we're going to slow down the dating process, we might accidentally become too attached too quickly to someone who is not presenting a genuine picture of themselves. As you go through life, you're going to meet all kinds of different people. It's not your fault if you meet a toxic person, and it certainly is not your fault if they are hiding who they truly are when you first begin dating them. And unfortunately, some people do that. You'll meet people who will lie to you within the first 5 minutes of meeting you. They'll tell you that they're divorced, and then 5 dates in, they'll say, well, technically the papers haven't been filed yet, but emotionally we're completely done. You see, sometimes people say things because they don't like the way that the truth sounds. But don't let that become your problem. Let them live with their truth. A lot of times, being uncomfortable is how we all get fed up enough to change something we don't like in our lives anyway. As anxious people, we feel like we are the ones who are going to miss out on them when it's these jerks who aren't showing up into the dating world authentically. The guy who tells you how awesome you are and then immediately ghosts you. The woman who allows you to pay for all the dates but conveniently forgets to mention that she's still a booty call for that toxic ex that she never quite got over yet. Or the most special kind of people who show up one way, polite, interested, engaging, sensitive, smiling, but experiencing the reality of a daily life with them is very different. Now, when you call them, you don't know which personality is going to pick up the phone, or if they will listen to what you have to say, or disengage, check out, or even hang up on you. I was talking to a viewer in the comments last week, and he and I had experienced some very similar crappy treatment from an ex-partner who would just hang up the phone on us whenever they felt like it, even if we were mid-sentence. Now, this kind of behavior is disrespectful, but how do we deal with it? Well, I'll tell you what I used to do. I would dial that phone and call them until they picked up, and then I would bitch and moan and nag about how their behavior was hurtful. Trying to teach guys like this how to treat me, and spend the next couple of days trying to explain to him why his hurtful behavior hurt my feelings so much, and why I deserved to be treated with common decency, and please don't do it again. But they always did it again. And I don't know about the gentleman that I was talking to, but I know for me, there were some small red flags along the way that I blew past before it ever got to the point where I was just being hung up on. In fact, let's use this guy. I'll call him Zach. The kind of guy who hangs up on his girlfriends because he doesn't feel like talking anymore. We're going to go ahead and use him as an example. Now, I can remember the very first date I ever had with Zach. I dressed really nice, I got all made up, and I remember sitting next to him at a bar. We were listening to music and we laughed all night long. 3 weeks later, I went to his house so we could hang out, have a movie night. And I remember sitting on his couch, and I looked over and I asked Zach if I could please have something to drink. And without skipping a beat, he looked over at me, kind of sneered, and said, "You got legs." Well, Zach wasn't wrong. I did have legs, and that night I should have used them to walk right out of his door. But when these things happen, they kind of come out of nowhere, and they seem out of character. But that was really the first time that Zach was actually being honest with me about who he was about to be if I decided to continue a relationship with him. And even though this is a scenario that happened at least 20 years ago, the day that I sat down to paint my nails and look at all of my past mistakes that I had made in my dating career, this instance was one that really stuck out in my mind, because it's so hard to believe I was ever in a place where this wasn't such an obvious red flag. There shouldn't have been any confusion about it. And not only was it a red flag, it should have been a cut and dry deal breaker. No confusion. But I was confused, and I didn't say anything. I very quietly got up and I got myself a drink, sat back down, and that was the end of it. I mean, it happens that fast. From that moment on, he knew he could treat me like that. And trust me, behavior like this only gets worse. It escalated and got worse until 6 months later, he dumped me. And how embarrassing to be dumped by a guy, any guy, who would treat a woman like that. And of course, because it was me and this was my pattern, I couldn't let him go. I begged him to stay in my life, and I accepted being friends with benefits as an attempt to win him back and get back to my girlfriend status. Friends with benefits, what a joke. And who needs friends like that anyway? Because his behavior began to get so bad. I mean, once I agreed to sleep with him without the commitment, you want to talk about bad behavior, he's got a free pass, a get out of jail free card to do anything that he wanted. The behavior got so bad that I finally went into no contact. And after 4 months of no contact, I decided, he's not an evil person, but he's definitely a jerk boyfriend. I wish I could say that after that I went on and I had learned the lessons and I had my happily ever after, and that's not true. But we do learn small lessons along the way. What's crazy is that if you were at the bar that night that Zach and I were first together, you would never guess that in only a couple of months, his emotional neglect, backhanded compliments, and breadcrumbing tactics would have me crying my eyes out, begging for him to spend just a little bit of his weekend with me. And when he got tired of hearing it, he would just hang up the phone. I am so sorry I ever gave him that kind of power over me, and I am encouraging you today, please do not ever give other people the power to decide when you are allowed to speak. Just stop talking to them. Trauma can change us in ugly ways, and that's why I believe true transformation is when you become the person you were always meant to be before someone toxic or someone who is emotionally ugly got a hold of you and filled your head with all kinds of cognitive distortions about yourself that are not reality. Transformation helps you become the person that you were always meant to be. I showed up to that relationship with Zach accepting poor treatment because something toxic in this world had already gotten a hold of me. It skewed how I saw myself. So when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who needed a man like that in order to feel valuable. I have a video that I'll link down below where I talk about sacrificing having a social life for a couple of months in order to detox a toxic friend group. The good news? I did get away from some pretty terrible friends. The bad news? When I finally got myself back out into the world, going to parties, trying to meet new people, this Zach guy was basically one of the first people I met. And he introduced me to all of his friends, and I really enjoyed them. They were good people. They were a lot of fun. I began hanging out with them and Zach every weekend. But now here's the problem. I went to one party, and instead of making my own friends, I immediately began dating Zach, and my friends were now his friends, and the stakes are a lot higher because it wasn't just a fear of losing him. It was a fear of if he went away, now they all go away. It was a fear of losing my entire social life all over again, and the thought of going back to spending weekend after weekend alone, sitting in my dark room watching reruns of old 80s sitcoms, that felt like death. You see, I hadn't developed myself into someone who was okay with sitting alone with myself because I was interested in things I had going on in my own life. I hadn't yet secured my own friend group, my own interesting hobbies, or my own challenging personal goals. You know, the kind of things that you cherish so much that if some jerk comes along and threatens to disrupt everything and disrupt your happiness and your peace, well, they're the ones who've got to get got. Because it is no longer about giving up your entire life and your identity for someone else. It's about meeting people that you enjoy, and their company only enhances the interesting life you have already begun to build for yourself. You know what the sick twist is about Zach? Even if I had convinced him to stay with me, he would have brought me down. People like these guys are seldom people who have it all together, and as time goes by, they begin to let their slips show in public. People will eventually find out how you are being treated, and while they might decide they don't necessarily like him anymore, they're also going to judge you for staying with him. You will become a source of gossip for them and a stick with which they measure the health of their own relationship and decide, maybe they don't have it so bad. And I don't know about you, but I do not want a relationship where other women observe it and they decide they've got it pretty good and they feel bad for me. Toxic relationships will never transform you into the most attractive version of yourself because weak people will turn you into the weakest version of yourself. They need someone weaker than they are because even though they appear stoic and like they have it all together, they don't for a second feel that they are strong. And you know, I had a commenter last week who said, yeah, jerks reap what they sow. I absolutely believe that. You want to be a jerk to people? Fine. But don't be surprised when, the years go by and less people feel like hanging out. Do you know last year around Christmas season, I ran into Zach while I was out shopping with my family. He was standing in line outside of a local movie theater and he recognized me and he called out to me while I was walking past him. We had a little bit of small talk. Zach is probably almost 50 now, and he told me he was there to check out the local singles scene because it was slim pickings over in his neighboring town. I smiled and I nodded and I told him it was nice to see him. And then I bent down and I picked up my daughter and I reached out and I took my partner's hand and I did what I should have done 20 years ago. I looked him square in his eyes. I wished him all the luck in the dating world. And I turned around and I used those legs he was so adamant about and I walked away. And because I remember to do my squats every week, I know I looked good doing it. But welcome to the other half, where we know attraction is not just about looks. We also need to take care of the inner half. Because when people like you and people like Zach first get together, they probably think you're pretty darn attractive, but it sure won't make them love you or want to stay with you or propose to you or have kids with you or even treat you with respect. We find people like the Zachs of the world, and people aren't black and white. Of course they have some good qualities. Zach was funny and charismatic, and he was a great dancer. I mean, there's a reason why we are enamored with people like this. Regardless of attachment styles, everyone has good and wonderful qualities about themselves. And no one is perfect, but some people show some real deal breakers, and part of my problem was I didn't know anything about how to navigate relationships, having boundaries. Leaning back and observing how people treat me wasn't in my wheelhouse. As a result, 3 weeks into a dating scenario, when Zach told me that I'd get my own drink because I had legs, I'd already been sleeping with him, hanging out with him, and talking with him on the phone multiple times a day. And especially for someone who has an anxious attachment wound, of course I needed that relationship to work. I've already given him everything. We have an inspirational viewer, Durwood Hamburger, who says, walking away from abusive or low interest women while up-leveling myself has been the most satisfying journey I have ever been on. 2 years ago, I was skinny, depressed, low self-worth, and an anxious attachment style. I would put women up on a pedestal. Yeah, we do things like that. We feel like everyone is above us. Now I'm 14 kilograms heavier, jacked, happy, confident, self-validated, and way more secure. I've saved a ton of money, and I still consider myself a good man, but I am in no way a nice guy or a people pleaser. The most important work has been the inner work. When I bow out, I do it respectfully. Seeing the reaction of an unhealed woman who fumbled a good man is absolutely priceless. Self-respect does become addictive. Life is so unpredictable and up and down. It's important that we maintain our self-respect and learn how to remain centered in ourselves. That way, no matter what is going on around us, we don't become vulnerable to people who could exploit our insecurities. They single us out because we have a scarcity mindset, and whether you realize it or not, it does show up on dates. And it gives them the signal that you are going to be someone who accepts half of the kind of relationship that you actually want. Perhaps my ex Zach was a jerk, but when it came to the human anatomy, as much as I hate to admit it, he was brilliant. We've got legs. And if you are using them to run after people who do not deserve you, chances are this is not the first time you've been down this road, and it leads to nowhere. You will be so much happier once you get out of that insecure rut and take the scary but very satisfying journey of self-respect while walking away down the road less traveled. And if you'd like to watch a video about detoxing your social life, I'll put that video right here. My name is Maria Adriana. You did not have to live my life, but I certainly hope you can learn something from it. As always, thank you for visiting The Other Half.
Love me.
You will